There is a silence that lives inside a house where the people you love have already decided to erase you. And the cruelest part is that you cannot hear it. You are still cooking their meals. You are still folding their laundry into neat little stacks. You are still smiling at them across the dinner table while they smile back and count down the quiet days until they can throw you away. I lived inside that silence for 3 years and called it my marriage. I want you to understand that I was not a foolish woman. I had a degree. I had built a life with my own 2 hands once. But love makes you deaf in a way nothing else can. And by the time I finally heard the truth, it was being spoken in the dark on a back porch by the 2 people I trusted more than anyone alive. I wasn't even supposed to be awake that night. My daughter had a fever, the kind that turns a baby's whole body into a furnace. And I had walked her back and forth across that nursery for what felt like hours until she finally went limp and warm against my shoulder. When I laid her down, I noticed the other side of the bed was cold. My husband was gone. I went looking for him the way a tired wife does. Half asleep, not afraid yet, and that is the part that still breaks me. I wasn't afraid. I padded down the dark stairs thinking maybe he couldn't sleep, maybe he wanted water, maybe he was being sweet and letting me rest. And then, through the kitchen window, I heard their voices, low and easy and rehearsed, and I stopped moving entirely. If my little girl had slept through that night, I would have slept right through the night they decided to erase me. I stood there in the dark with soap still drying on my hands, and I listened to my husband and his mother talk about me the way you talk about a problem you've already solved. Calm, patient, a little bored even. They had a plan, and the plan had been running long before I ever suspected a thing, and they had no idea I was standing 10 feet away hearing every word of it. I didn't scream, but a few tears rolled from my eyes as I pressed my hand over my own mouth and I memorized every single word they said, because somewhere in that kitchen, a quiet woman died and a far more patient one took her place. By the time they came to take everything, I had already decided exactly what I was taking back. Her name was Imani Caldwell. She was 31 years old, a wife, a mother, and the kind of woman most people walked right past without a second look, which turned out to be the most dangerous thing about her. To understand the choice she made on the worst night of her life, you have to sit with 3 questions, and I promise you the answers are uglier than anything you are imagining right now. The first question is simple. Why would a man kneel on a bedroom floor, weeping, gripping his wife's hands, begging her not to leave him, and mean absolutely none of it? The second cuts deeper. What were Imani's husband and his mother truly after, and how far back did the plan really reach? Was it months? Was it years? Had any of it ever been real? And the third question is the one that changes everything, the one that turns this from a story about a broken marriage into something else entirely. When the quietest, most overlooked woman in that cold house finally understands that everyone she loves has been lying to her face, what is she willing to do? And how far is she willing to go to make every single one of them pay for it? Because here is what the neighbors saw. They saw a devoted husband caring tenderly for a fragile, failing wife. They saw a good man carrying a heavy burden with grace. Not one of them ever stopped to ask the only question that mattered. They never asked why she only started falling apart the very month her family came into a fortune. To know how Imani ended up frozen in that dark kitchen, you have to go back to the girl she was before any of them got their hands on her. She grew up 2 hours south of Charlotte, in one of those small towns where everybody knows your grandmother's maiden name and your business before you know it yourself. Her parents, Otis and Pearl Caldwell, ran a little corner grocery that opened at 6 in the morning and closed when the last neighbor finally wandered home. They were not poor exactly. They were the careful kind of people who never once in their lives had a spare dollar to waste, who counted change into a coffee can and called it a college fund. They put Imani through school on grocery money and stubborn faith, and the day she walked across that stage, her father cried so hard he had to take off his glasses and wipe them on his shirt. She met Grant Holloway in her final year of college, and to a girl raised on careful living, he looked like the whole sky opening up. He was smooth in a slow, unhurried way, the son of a Charlotte family with old furniture and even older opinions about who belonged at their table. Grant talked about the future like a man who already owned it, and Imani, warm and bright and just a little too trusting, believed every beautiful word that came out of his mouth. Within a year, they were married. Within 2, she was holding a baby girl. And somewhere in the middle of all that joy, so slowly that she never felt the moment it began, the life Imani had built with her own hands started to disappear, one quiet concession at a time, until she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. The trouble had a name, and the name was Diane Holloway. Grant's mother had decided long before the wedding that Imani was beneath her son, a small-town girl with no money and no pedigree who had no business marrying up into a family like theirs. At first, Diane never said it out loud. She didn't have to. She said it in the way she lifted the lids off Imani's pots and let her face fall. She said it in the way she introduced her at gatherings as Grant's wife. Never once by name, as though a name were a privilege Imani hadn't earned. "You'll learn how we do things here," Diane would say, smiling like a blade. Imani told herself it would soften with time. She told herself every cold word was just a test she could pass if she only tried a little harder. It never softened, it only sharpened. When Imani got pregnant, something shifted, and for a few short months she let herself believe the war was over. Diane grew almost warm, fussing over prenatal vitamins, sending Grant out at midnight for whatever strange thing Imani craved. For the first time, Imani felt like she might actually belong. Maybe a baby is the thing that finally lets me in, she remembers telling herself, her hand resting on her growing belly. Maybe she just needed a reason to love me. She wanted that so badly she could taste it. And then the doctor said one word, the word girl, and the warmth drained out of that house overnight, like someone had pulled a plug. Diane stopped asking how Imani felt. She started calling her useless, a woman who couldn't even manage to give the family a proper son. You have to understand what that does to a person. Imani had just brought a perfect, healthy daughter into the world, a tiny girl with her father's eyes and her grandfather's stubborn chin, and instead of celebration, she was handed shame. A girl? Diane sighed over the crib, not bothering to lower her voice. Well, maybe the next one will be worth something. Imani held her newborn a little tighter and swallowed it, the way she swallowed everything. After the birth, she wanted to go back to work, back to the career she had earned and loved. But Diane refused to lift a single finger to help with the baby and quietly made sure no one else would either. So Imani stayed home. She cooked, she cleaned, she carried, she gave up her independence, her income, her name, and most of all the version of herself she used to be proud of. But the cruelest leash was never the housework. It was the money. After the baby came, Diane took control of Grant's paycheck, claiming she was only keeping the household in order. Every single morning, she left a small handful of bills on the side table by the door, grocery money, counted out like an allowance to a child. And sometimes, when Imani came home, Diane would hold out her hand for the change and count it twice. Picture that. A grown woman with a college degree, standing in her own kitchen, asking permission to buy diapers for her own daughter. "I used to lie awake wondering how I let it get that far," Imani would say later, her voice quiet. And the honest answer is that nobody steals your whole life in one night. They take it one swallowed word at a time, until one day you look up and there's nothing left of you to defend. She told herself she was keeping the peace. She told herself a good wife endures, a good mother sacrifices, that one day they would all see how much she had given and finally love her for it. So she cooked their meals and washed their floors and bit her tongue until it bled. And she taught those 2 people one lesson she would later make them deeply regret. She taught them that no matter what they did to her, Imani Caldwell would never, ever make a sound. They mistook her silence for weakness. They built their entire plan on it, and not one of them, not Grant, not Diane, not the woman who was about to walk into their lives and light a match, understood that a quiet woman is not a weak woman. A quiet woman is simply a woman who is listening, and Imani heard everything. The first crack in the lie came on an ordinary afternoon, while Imani stood at the sink hand-washing one of Grant's shirts. Her phone buzzed so hard against the counter it nearly clattered to the floor. It was Keisha Rowan, her best friend since the 9th grade, the one person on earth who had never once told Imani to be patient with that family. But Keisha's voice that day was wrong. It was tight, and careful the way you speak when you're holding something heavy you don't want to drop. "Where are you right now?" she asked. Imani frowned, soap dripping from her fingers. "At home, washing clothes." "Why? What's wrong?" There was a long pause on the line. "I need you to put down whatever you're holding," Keisha said slowly. and come to me right now. I'm sending you an address, and Imani, please, don't tell anybody in that house where you're going." Diane's voice chased her the whole way out the door, sharp and disgusted, demanding to know who exactly was going to cook lunch if Imani went running off like a child the second she got a phone call. Imani didn't answer. She had learned long ago that silence was the only door Diane couldn't kick open. She drove with her heart pounding to an address she didn't recognize, a quiet wine bar tucked off the main road, and found Keisha waiting on the upper level, half hidden behind a row of tall, potted plants. The moment Keisha saw her, she reached out and took both of Imani's hands in hers, holding them tight. "Before you look," she said, and her eyes were already glassy, "I need you to breathe. I need you to stay calm. You deserve to know the truth, baby, even though it's going to hurt you. God, I'm so sorry." Then she turned slowly and nodded toward a table near the window. Imani only meant to glance. A man and a woman sat close together, the woman's head tipped lazily against his shoulder. The two of them laughing softly like the rest of the world had gone quiet just for them. Imani almost looked away, and then she saw the watch on his wrist, the one she'd saved for 3 months to buy him. She saw the shoes she had picked out herself, last Christmas, kneeling in a department store while he tried them on. She saw the wedding ring still catching the light on his hand. It was Grant, her Grant, comfortable, easy, wrapped around a woman who was not his wife, and from the relaxed, familiar way they fit together, Imani understood in one sickening instant that this was not a first afternoon. This had been happening for a long, long time. Her whole body went cold. The room tilted. She gripped the edge of the table just to stay standing. Keisha got her out of there before she shattered, pulling her gently by the arm down the stairs and out into the daylight, and she drove them to a quiet spot by the water where no one could see. And that was where Imani finally broke. The sound that came out of her was not crying, not really. It was something older, something that came up from the floor of her, a low, ragged sob she couldn't stop or control. She pressed her hands over her face and folded forward in the passenger seat and wept for the marriage she thought she had, for the years, for the trust, for the woman she'd been an hour ago who didn't know yet. "What did I do wrong?" she finally choked out, her face wet and crumpled. "Tell me. Maybe after the baby I stopped being enough. Maybe I let myself go. Maybe I'm just not. Stop it." Keisha grabbed her by both shoulders and turned her hard, her own tears spilling over now. "Don't you dare. You did everything right. You are a good mother and a good woman, and he is the one who broke this, not you. Don't you pick up his sin and carry it on your back. Not for one more day." Imani looked at her best friend and whispered the only thought that would fit in her chest. 3 years, Keisha." He handed her my 3 years, and he didn't even take off the ring. Imani went home that night because there was nowhere else in the world for her to go, and because her baby girl was sleeping in a crib inside that house. So she did what she always did. She cooked dinner. She stood at the stove with her hands shaking and listened to Diane criticize the seasoning. She watched her husband walk through the door in the very same shirt she'd seen at the wine bar and play the role of devoted family man, kissing the baby's head, asking about her day, and she kept her eyes down on her plate so that no one would see what was burning behind them. But Imani was not built to live a lie in silence forever. A few nights later, after the baby was down, she called Grant into their bedroom, and without a single word, she lifted her phone and turned the screen toward him. The photo Keisha had taken. His face drained of every drop of color in under a second. For a long moment, neither of them breathed. "Who is she?" Imani asked, and somehow her voice came out steady, even though her hands were trembling so badly she had to set the phone down. Grant sank onto the edge of the bed and dropped his face into his palms. "Her name is Brittany," he said, muffled. Imani let out a small, broken laugh. "You say her name like you've said it 1,000 times, like it lives in your mouth." And then the oldest performance in the world began. He cried. Real tears, or tears that looked real enough to fool a woman who wanted to be fooled. He swore it started as nothing, that it grew into something he never meant, that he still loved her, still loved their daughter, that he would do anything, anything at all, if she would only stay. And then Grant Holloway slid off the edge of that bed, down onto his knees on the carpet, and reached for her hands and begged.
"Please don't leave me."
"Please," he wept, gripping her fingers, pressing them to his forehead. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I broke us. But please don't take my family away from me. Please. I'll end it tomorrow. I swear on our daughter's life I'll never see her again. Just don't leave me." And Imani, looking down at the man she had built her entire world around, kneeling and shaking and crying at her feet, made the decision she would spend the next several weeks bitterly regretting. "This is your last chance," she whispered, tears rolling silently down her own face. "If you ever lie to me again, Grant, we are finished. Do you understand me? Finished." He grabbed her and held on like a drowning man, and for a little while, God help her, he changed. He washed dishes. He took the baby to daycare. He cooked badly and smiled while he burned the eggs. Diane was furious, snapping at her son for doing a woman's work, and for once in his life, he ignored his mother completely. Imani watched her marriage flicker back towards something warm, and she let herself hope. She wanted to believe that people could break and mend more than she had ever wanted anything in her life. That hope was the mistake that very nearly killed her. The truth came back the way these things always do, by pure accident, on a day that started like any other. Imani had dropped the baby at daycare and stopped at a shopping plaza for a few things. And as she passed a restaurant window, she heard a laugh she knew in her bones. She turned, and there was Grant, sitting across from Brittany, the same woman from the wine bar, her hand laid over his on the white tablecloth, her face soft and certain. Imani stepped behind a sidewalk planter through the window glass before they could see her, her whole body going to ice. And through the glass, she watched Brittany lean in and say something that made Grant's expression change. A moment later, outside on the sidewalk, Imani heard the words that detonated everything she'd rebuilt.
I'm
pregnant, Brittany said, smiling, one hand drifting to her stomach. And the doctor confirmed it this morning. It's a boy, a boy. The single word landed on Imani like a collapsing roof. A son. The one thing Diane had spent 3 years punishing her for failing to produce. The thing that had turned her own daughter's birth into a family disappointment. Imani stood frozen behind the sidewalk planter, waiting, praying, for Grant to deny it, to pull his hand away, to be the man who had wept on her bedroom floor. Instead, she heard him ask, soft and almost hopeful, a question that ended her marriage for the second and final time. "You're sure," he said. "You're really sure it's a boy?" Imani did not confront them. She did not make a scene. She drove home on autopilot, picked up her daughter, cooked dinner, and said absolutely nothing, while inside her something hardened into a shape that would never soften again. She was done crying. Crying was for women who still had hope. That night, her daughter's fever spiked again. After she finally settled her, she came down to the dark kitchen. Grant's side of the bed cold, a basket of his shirts still waiting at the sink. And as she stood there, hands in the water, she heard their voices drifting in through the open window from the back porch. Grant and his mother, and this time Imani did not announce herself. She stood very still in the dark, and she listened. "Are you certain it's a boy?" Diane was asking. Her voice hushed and pleased in a way Imani had never once heard it directed at her. "That's what she says," Grant answered. There was a soft sound, almost a laugh. "Then you stop wasting your time on the other one," Diane said.
She gave
you a girl. This one is giving you a son, a real heir. And Imani, hand frozen on the doorframe, waited for her husband to defend her, to say something, anything, that would prove that the last few weeks had been real. He didn't. "I can't move on her yet, Mama," Grant said, calm as a man reading a grocery list. "You don't know this. Imani's father just got the compensation on that land back home. A developer's buying the whole parcel for an industrial park. We're talking millions. They've only got Imani and her sister to split it between, so her share alone could set us up for the rest of our lives." Diane breathed the word like it was holy. "Millions. That's why I have to keep her sweet a little longer," Grant went on. "Keep playing the good husband. The second that money clears and it's in our name, I put her out and I bring my son home. And then, in the dark, the two of them laughed together, a soft, satisfied, intimate laugh between a mother and a son, while the woman who washed their clothes and cooked their meals stood 10 feet away, with her hand clamped over her own mouth to keep from screaming. Every kind word, Imani realized, her vision swimming, every washed dish, every tear on that bedroom floor, none of it was ever for me. He wasn't sorry. He was shopping for my father's land. And I was nothing but the receipt. She climbed the stairs without a sound, lay down beside her sleeping baby, and did not close her eyes once. By morning, the grief was gone. What replaced it was patient and cold, and far more useful. And before we dive deeper, Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what Imani did next is the part of this story that nobody saw coming, least of all the man who thought he was the smartest person in the house. Here is what Grant Holloway never understood about his wife. She had spent 3 long years being underestimated, and underestimation, it turns out, is a kind of armor. While he slept soundly beside her, certain he was winning, Imani lay awake building a plan. She decided she would not throw a single plate. She would not scream or cry, or give him one reason to suspect that the quiet, broken woman he thought he controlled had vanished in the night. If his fake devotion was a weapon, then she would pick that same weapon up and turn it slowly around to point at him. He had been asking her every morning what she wanted, so Imani started to want things. A craving mentioned in passing over breakfast, and he would come home that evening with bags of it, eager to prove he'd changed. A class reunion she invented out of thin air, and Grant peeled cash off a roll without blinking. Money his own mother had guarded like a dragon for 2 years. And every dollar he handed over, Imani folded quietly and tucked into an old shoebox at the back of her closet, on top of the savings she'd hidden away from her working days, long before he could control her money. Divorce takes a lawyer, she told herself, smoothing the bills flat in the dark. And a lawyer takes money. And I will not walk into that courtroom with empty hands and a begging face. Not this time. She was careful. She never pushed too hard, never asked for too much too fast, because a fish only bites when the bait feels safe. So she smiled, and she thanked him, and she let him believe every lie was working exactly as he'd planned. The more confident Grant grew, the more carelessly he spent, and the more he spent, the thicker that shoebox got. He thought he was the hunter. He never once felt the trap closing around his own foot. Then Imani spent some of that quiet money on the truth. She hired a private investigator, a calm older man who asked few questions and brought back answers that stunned even her. Grant, it turned out, had a savings account in his name alone, opened just weeks after their wedding, with steady monthly deposits stacked up to nearly $20,000. He owned a silent share in a restaurant downtown. And the seed money for that investment traced straight back to a so-called loan he had taken from Imani years earlier. Her wedding gold, handed over without hesitation for a friend's emergency that had never actually existed, and never once repaid. The man who let his mother count out her diaper change had been quietly building himself an empire on her back the entire time. Imani read that page twice, and then she set it down very gently, because her hands had started to shake, not with sadness this time, but with something closer to fury. But the report saved its sharpest blade for last, for Brittany. The woman was no heartbroken innocent who had fallen for a married man. She was a practiced operator who had targeted Grant precisely because she knew how desperately he wanted a son, and she was running the very same game on 2 other men at the same time. As for the baby she was so certain about, the investigator put it plainly in black and white. No one could say for sure who the father actually was. Imani sat alone with that piece of paper, and for the first time in months, she laughed out loud, a real laugh, startling and bright in the empty room. "My clever, scheming husband," she said to no one, shaking her head, "spent all this time being played by a woman even colder than he is. There really is such a thing as justice in this world. It just takes the long way around to get to you." And it gave her an idea. Because a man being robbed by his own mistress is a man who is about to lose far more than he knows. She set the last piece of the trap before he even knew there was a trap. She called her parents and asked them, gently but firmly, to say nothing about the land money to anyone, no matter who asked or how. At first they didn't understand. Why on earth would we keep it from Grant? Her father asked, confused. But Otis Caldwell had raised that girl, and he heard the tightness underneath her careful voice, and something in his chest went still and cold. "Imani," he said quietly. "Baby, what is going on up there?" She couldn't tell him, not yet. Couldn't bring herself to say the words out loud, that the man they'd welcomed into their family was planning to rob them blind and throw their daughter away. So she made up a soft excuse and asked him to simply trust her, and because he loved her, he did. The Holloways grew impatient. Suddenly, Grant cared deeply about family. "It's been too long since you took the baby to see your folks." he said one evening, all warmth, and Diane, who had once been unable to stand the mention of Imani's parents, agreed eagerly. So they drove down for the weekend, and Imani watched her husband work. All weekend long, he steered every conversation toward that land, toward a business idea he was thinking about, toward how much an industrial development might be worth to a lucky family. And all weekend long, Otis Caldwell blinked at him slowly, scratched his chin, and pretended to doze off mid-sentence. Grant drove home Sunday night with his jaw clenched, having learned absolutely nothing. He didn't know it, but he didn't need to learn anything. Imani was already finished. She had everything she needed, and the time for waiting was over. She wrote out the divorce papers herself, and she laid them on the kitchen table in front of Grant and both his parents. And she said it without a single tremor in her voice. Grant and I are getting divorced. Diane shot up out of her chair, sputtering, demanding to know who had given Imani the right. The law gave me the right, Imani answered calmly. Grant tried tenderness first, reaching for her hand, his eyes going soft and wet on command. Baby, I've changed. You've seen it. Please don't do this. So Imani named the porch. She named Brittany. She named the land, and the plan to throw her out the moment the money cleared, and his beautiful performance collapsed in real time. The softness drained from his face, and what was left underneath was something she had never let herself see before. You think this will be easy, he said, his voice gone flat and ugly. We have no shared property. You walk out of here with nothing and no one. Imani smiled, and it was not a warm smile. Are you sure about that, Grant? Are you sure I don't know about the account you opened the month we married? The restaurant? The wedding gold you stole and never gave back? Everything you have, you built standing on my back. You are not going to keep all of it. His face went gray. He had no idea how much she had prepared, how long she had been awake while he slept. He lunged up and tore the papers down the middle, again and again, and Imani didn't even flinch. The next morning she packed a bag, lifted her baby girl onto her hip, and headed for the door. Diane saw the suitcase and screamed for her son, and Grant came rushing down and planted himself in the doorway, refusing to let his daughter, his last link to that fortune, walk out of his life. He reached for the baby. The little girl began to wail, and on the front steps, in the chaos of the struggle with the baby crying, Imani lost her footing and fell, striking her head against the stone. What she remembers next is the dark. She remembers floating somewhere far down beneath it, hearing voices that seemed to come from the top of a deep well. A doctor's calm murmur that her life was not in danger, but whether she ever woke again was entirely up to her now. And then Grant's voice, thick and trembling with a grief that sounded almost real, thanking the doctors over and over for saving his beloved wife. But when the room emptied and the door clicked shut, Imani heard him lean down close to her ear, and the trembling was gone, and what was left turned her blood to ice. You did this perfectly, you know, he whispered, almost fondly. You can't die, because then I can't sign for the money, and you can't wake up either, because you'd never give me a dime. So this right here is just right. A coma suits you. Thank you, baby, truly. And then her husband kissed her forehead, called her his poor girl, and walked out. And Imani, trapped inside a body that would not move, swore a silent oath that she would claw her way back if it took the rest of her life. There was only one visitor who came without an audience. A quiet man who waited each evening until the paid caregiver had gone home, who would gently work her stiff arms and her unmoving legs so the muscles wouldn't waste away, murmuring that he wasn't ready to let her fade. He smelled faintly of peppermint, clean and cool, and he told her small, soft stories about nothing at all. And every single time before he left, he leaned close and said the same words. Wake up soon. There's still so much left for you to do. Imani could not see his face. She could not open her eyes or move her hand or make a single sound. But somewhere in that long, dark silence, she began to live for the sound of his footsteps, and she began in secret to fight. One finger, then two, a toe, a breath held a second longer. Day by day, behind a face the world believed was empty, Imani Caldwell was coming back to life, and she told no one. Grant moved exactly the way she knew he would. He told her parents he could no longer afford her care, and grief made them generous, the way grief always does. They arranged to sign the land compensation over so their daughter could be cared for, with Grant, the loving husband, receiving it on her behalf. On the morning of the transfer, the family gathered in that hospital room, the lawyer standing ready, And Otis Caldwell took his daughter's limp hand and leaned down close, his voice breaking. "I'm signing today, baby girl," he whispered. "I just wish to God you were awake to see your old daddy take care of you." And that, after all those silent weeks, was the moment Imani had trained her whole broken body, for she opened her eyes, she turned her head, and she squeezed her father's hand with everything she had left. "Daddy," she said, her voice a cracked whisper, but clear enough. Don't sign anything. I don't need him to take care of me. I never did." The room froze. Her mother screamed and burst into tears, rushing to the bed. Her father's knees nearly gave out, and Imani lifted one trembling hand and pointed it straight at her husband, who had gone the color of ash. "Ask him why I fell," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. "Ask him about a woman named Brittany. Ask him why he wouldn't let me leave with my own child. Ask him about the land." And the whole rotten story poured out of her right there, in front of the very people he had been trying to rob, while Grant stammered and backed toward the wall with no lie left that could save him. Otis Caldwell turned to the lawyer, and his voice came out like cold iron. "Cancel the transfer, and help my daughter finish her divorce instead." Grant lost what was left of his composure and surged toward the bed in a panic. And that was the exact moment the door opened, and the quiet peppermint visitor stepped through it, putting himself squarely between Grant and the woman in the bed, ending it before it could begin. Imani looked up at her rescuer's face for the first time, and she knew him instantly. The boy with the glasses from high school, who had watched her shyly from across a classroom for years, and never found the courage to speak. The one who had stepped quietly out of her life the day she married another man, and who had come quietly back the day he learned that man was destroying her. His name was Julian Foster. He looked around that hospital room for one face that still believed him. Imani would say. There wasn't a single one left. Grant Holloway was charged, convicted, and sent away for a long time, and every hidden asset he had built on his wife's back, the account, the restaurant, the gold, was placed into a trust in their daughter's name, to be held by her mother until the girl is grown. And as they led him out in handcuffs, Imani told him the one truth she had been saving, the one that finally broke him. The son he had sold his marriage and his soul to claim had never been his at all. He nearly lost his mind right there in that hallway, and Imani simply turned and walked away. She mourned in the months that followed, not for him, but for the years that had been real and precious to her, and nothing but a long performance to him. "I spent 3 years believing that the quietest person in the room is the weakest," she said softly. "They taught me different. The quiet one is the only one who hears everything. I didn't lose my mind in that house. I just finally found the nerve to use it." She married Julian Foster on a bright afternoon under an arch of white and lavender roses, her father holding her arm and weeping the good kind of tears this time, her little girl walking ahead of them and scattering petals with both fists. And at the end of that aisle stood a man who had loved her quietly, patiently, and honestly, for longer than she had ever known. And this time, when she said yes, she was right. So let me leave you with this. Grant fooled an entire room full of people who loved and trusted him for years and almost got away with everything. Would you have caught the moment he gave himself away? Or would you have poured the wine, taken the ring, and smiled right back? Tell us in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, do us a kindness and like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to NovaDiary Fiction so you never miss what we release each week. This was I Overheard My Husband's Scheming. They planned it all. I made a choice they didn't expect. And we'll see you in the next one.